Today we will be talking about understanding motivation and ADHD. Let's get into it. So opening up the chapter, the author talks about how her whole life it's been a battle between her and her brain. She'll know that she has to do something or want to do something, yet her brain will make her do something else. And even if she manages to force herself to do whatever it is that she needs to do, she found that the next time around, it would be even harder to do it, right? So after this, the author jumps into talking about what she learned and now what we will learn, right? From her research on motivation and ADHD. So she learned that our brains aren't motivated by what's important. Oftentimes, the important tasks that have to get done are deemed boring because our brain has an aversion to anything that is boring. And now these boring things usually cause a delay in the sense of they usually take time, right? So if we talk about folding laundry, and then you can't stand folding laundry, it takes you a minute to fold all the laundry, right? And because our brains don't like all that boringness in between, even though we know that folding the laundry will mean it will make our bed space a lot more organized and neat looking, your brain will try to find a way to escape, right? And here you are 5 minutes later playing some video games. Now there's a term for this and it's called delay aversion. And so to define it, as she puts it in the book, it's our tendency to escape and avoid the distress that a delay causes, right? Well, the way our brain is wired is that our brains are wired to do things that provide us a reward now versus later. So for example, think eating a cookie gonna give you a reward immediately because it tastes good. It makes your taste buds taste good. But folding the laundry, the reward being that you have a nice organized room, that's gonna take you a little longer to get done, right? What motivates our brains to do things has to either be urgent, new, the right level of challenging, or of personal interest. The next section she titles We're Dopa Different, right? And as y'all might guess, this has to do with dopamine and how it works within us, right? So if you didn't know, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that motivates and reinforces behavior. Human brains in general oftentimes release anticipatory dopamine to get us to do things that we don't like in the moment for a later reward, right? So an example she loves to use is filling out tax forms. You might release some anticipatory dopamine while you're doing it because you know you about to get that $5,000 refund in a couple months if you finish these tax forms, right? That's what ends up motivating our brain to do it. When it comes to ADHD brains, it has a tendency to do something called reuptake, which is the reabsorption of dopamine. And this causes the dopamine to disappear before it hits the receptor that tells the brain, do the thing for reward later on, right? So we can see how that causes major problems in the way we function when it comes to motivation, right? And so because this got disrupted on its way, and so for a visual, so let's say we have some anticipatory dopamine that's been released in our brain, right? And the reason it was released is because you just got offered a job, and if you fill out the paperwork, it'll finalize you getting a job that pays you a lot more money than what you're currently getting paid right now, right? So anticipatory dopamine gets released and has to make it over here to this receptor to tell your brain, hey, we gotta do this so we can get a reward later on in a bigger pay, hourly pay, right? So it gets released, but with our brains, we have reuptake that happens. So instead of making it all the way over here to the receptor that to communicate that information, it ends up getting reabsorbed back into the brain, and it never makes it there. So our brain that receptor never got the message, right? It's another example I can give is, let's say like you send an urgent message to your friend, and on the way to your friend, a power line ends up getting knocked down by some wind in front of her house or something, or on the way to her house, so the message ends up failing and never ends up going through. And so that's kind of what happens with our brains. Once that happens, the message doesn't get across, we end up doing what? We end up getting distracted, as she says, playing video games, and then we get our instant dopamine hit, right? And then the brain starts to now learn that every time we start something tedious, we're gonna stop and immediately go get video game dopamine. And that's how the pattern is born. That's how the pattern starts to happen. The next thing is that rewards are often too far away. So piggybacking on the subjects of instant versus delayed things, there's two types of motivation, right? There's intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Let me hold them both up. Intrinsic, extrinsic, extrinsic, okay? Now, to define, intrinsic motivation happens when you do something because it is enjoyable and satisfying in and of itself. Now, extrinsic motivation is when you do something because of the external consequences of doing or not doing it, right? So with ADHD, we experience something called temporal discounting, which is where we perceive a desired result in the future as less valuable than one we could have now. This also happens to people with neurotypical brains, but when you pair that up with our short time horizons, it creates a bigger mess, which is that's the life of ADHD, right? Having all the same problems as everybody except more extreme. What happens with a lot of people with ADHD is that you end up waiting to get everything done at the very last minute. When you're hella under pressure, let's say, you know, you had to study for an exam and you wait until the very night before, and now you're cramming all night to get that done under a shitload of pressure. And that shitload of pressure basically ends up releasing a truckload of dopamine, right? And then you end up creating this pattern, right? You do that one time and then you do it again, 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 and it trains your brain to think, oh, this is the correct way to get our dopamine, by waiting until the last minute to study for the exam. In the long run, it's not sustainable, but you can break the pattern. And one of the ways to break that pattern is by adding immediate rewards while doing the thing. Kind of piggybacking on a bit of an example she's given before is like, let's say you got to go to work and you know, you can't stand your job, but you got to go to work, make some money. But if you add cookies, add a reward while you're doing it, right? Eat the cookies while you're working. You're giving yourself an immediate reward so that you can get that extrinsic reward as well. What's the extrinsic reward? Well, if I work all day, I end up getting paid for my work in 2 weeks from now. I also want to talk about is a personal experience that I also just had. While I was creating the outline for this video, and I'm also going to go further, I'm going to elaborate further on the same experience later on in the video, but I just want to talk about this small part right now. I was having trouble creating an outline. Like I was struggling. I was struggling to create the goddamn outline. And so what I ended up doing is I had cooked some fried yautía, I think it was the day before, and I put it in a little container, brought it to the room, and I ate yautía as I wrote or typed out the outline. And so, you know, literally pulling tips. I was literally pulling tips out of this chapter of the book that you know, I've been reading in order to get this done in real time, okay? The next thing that she learned is that the emotions we associate with the task matter. So when you're trying to do a task, it's not as simple, you know, with ADHD, it's not as simple as just doing it. There's this wall of awful, which is an emotional barrier, aka an emotional barrier that gets put up. It's a wall that is built due to the buildup of past failures that we have had, right? So the more we've, you know, struggled with, like, for example, a task, like the more we struggle with washing the dishes, the higher the wall of awful is going to be. And wall of awfuls are things that all human beings can end up building within themselves, aka emotional barriers. The only thing with ADHD, of course, is that these walls are often higher and more numerous, right? In fact, some of the most common emotions that people with ADHD experience are overwhelm, discouragement, hopelessness, fear, and confusion. As for me, big on the overwhelm and hopelessness. I have been there many times. Hell, as I was, you know, in the process of reading and trying to create an outline, the overwhelm was overwhelming. And when you also couple that with having a weak working memory, it gets, as we know, it's a hell of a struggle to get motivated, period. Next thing she learned is that behaviors precede motivation. Now, and I thought this was an interesting one, right? And you know, what she says is basically that we don't need motivation to take action. Action can generate motivation. So an example is if you pick up your phone, it'll motivate you to check your email, check your messages, or check your social media, right? And I just want to say, I didn't really believe, like, as I was reading it, I was like, this sounds too easy to be true. Or I'm like, I feel like this is easier said than done, right? Which sometimes it can be easier said than done, but I was trying to reflect on my life and I'm like, I don't know if there's a thing that works for me, right? And so with that, I want to go ahead and talk about my experience with how I kind of just struggled to get to this point of filming for this chapter, right? So it started off earlier this week, right? I will preface this by saying that I have been going through a lot of stress lately, and because of the stress, it's caused me to end up having other mental health issues resurface, right? And so I went and I started trying to read the chapter earlier this week. I was like a good 5 pages in, and I stopped. I couldn't keep reading. I just could not keep fucking reading. I was like, I can't do this. I stopped. I'm like, whatever, I'll pick it up again, right? A couple days later, I sat down, and I said, I'm gonna read this goddamn chapter because I need to get a video out by this Saturday. So I sat down and I read, finished reading the chapter. I finished reading the chapter and then continued on to my other household duties for the day, right? Later that night, I went and I talked to my partner and I was like, hey, like, I'm not gonna lie, I read this whole chapter today and I can't remember what the fuck I really read about. I remember like maybe like one sentence and I was like, I literally can't remember the gist of the chapter. Like, I did not retain anything. I passively read that shit. I was not entirely there. And, you know, we talked and she's like, maybe you need to take a break. Go watch some cartoons or something and try again. And I'm like, honestly, I am, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna read it again. But I decided to take a 2-day break. I did not pick up the book and I've just been trying to, you know, instead watch like cartoons and shows that I like, right? You know, the 2 days passed and I sat down and I started to read it again, right? I felt a little more refreshed and I started to read again and I noticed something that, you know, fucked with me. I I noticed that the stress not only was bringing up other mental health issues again, but the stress and also like physical issues, but the stress has been causing my ADHD issues as well to like go back. Like I've been like, it's been causing my ADHD issues to get worse, right? So I was sitting down and I started noticing that I could not stop fidgeting. Like I was just fidgeting, shaking my legs. I could not stop looking around. I kept getting distracted by, I don't know, the curtain or some shit, anything, right? I kept getting distracted by any and everything. I kept just completely like tuning out every time I started reading. I went, and mind you, these are issues that I haven't struggled with in a long time, right? And so I'm like, okay, let's see, like, let me try to do something, right? I put some like ambiance music, like a rainforest sound, and I put that on, right? I, started burning some sage, and I turned on a candle, all of these things, right? And I still could not sit still. And I got really emotional because I'm like, oh my God, like, I feel like I'm regressing. I thought I had a handle on these issues. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I feel like I've been, had control over these problems. I haven't had to have problems like these in years, okay? And, I went over to my partner and I'm getting emotional, think about it. And I just started crying. I started talking to her about it. I'm like, I feel like I'm just going backwards here. This, like, I can't read a chapter. I can't read a chapter of a book, okay? I can't read a chapter of a book. And it really fucked with me. And, we talked about it and she's like, okay, look, so what you're gonna do? She's like, go sit in the room, pause, and go watch a cartoon. I'm gonna turn on the AC for you, right? And so, she brought a chair into the room, turned on the AC, and, I cleaned my phone, cleaned the book, I brought it with me, I put it on the bed. And for a second there, I sat and I let the AC, just hit me. And I watched because I was already watching American Dad, if y'all know, like, that show. And so I was watching like an episode that I hadn't finished watching the other day. So it was like a good 8 minutes left of it. And so, I just sat there and I had finished watching the last 8 minutes of American Dad and just let myself get cooled down, right? Both emotionally and quite literally, right? After sitting for a bit, I grabbed my tripod and I set my phone up and I, had the camera button on. I wasn't recording myself, but I propped it up in front of myself so I could see myself, right? And I did that so I could start reading. I went ahead and cracked open the book again. And this time around, I was able to finish reading it. And not just read it, but able to retain it. And that's when, after I finished reading, I went and grabbed the yautía so I could go ahead and do the outline. I used the tip that I learned in this chapter, which is behavior precedes motivation. So what did I do? I took an action and then got the motivation to do the thing. The same thing where I'm like, I feel like that shit don't work. I've never even, I don't even think I've ever even been able to do it like that. I had to do it in order to read this chapter. By me putting the tripod, it instilled kind of like, hey, like this reminder right in front of my face of, hey, you need to read this chapter so that you can film. So read the chapter. And by doing that action of putting the tripod on and having the camera open, it generated the motivation to read the book. It's been a hell of a struggle to get to this point of where I'm filming right now. And I also had to just kind of tell myself hey, it's okay if you don't get this video out on Saturday. You got to take it easy. Clearly, you are not having the best week brain-wise. And so I kind of decided to just take that pressure off of myself and be okay with getting this video out at a later time. And something that the author talks about also the last thing that she talks about she learns is that it's not always entirely about motivation. Sometimes motivation isn't the problems. Motivation is just one part of our getting shit done system. And there's other possible issues that could be coming up, right? Some of these are a skill gap, a lack of resources, perfectionism, overly optimistic thinking, forgetfulness, and even an unrealistic goal. And so with that, we are now in the toolbox section. So for the first tool, as always, I'm go ahead and read off about it, and I'll go ahead and tell y'all which one I'm currently using or will be using, right? So tool number 1 is fill in the motivational planks. And I just want to preface it by filling in the motivational planks, she gives the example of a bridge. So let's say our motivation is like a bridge, right? And that bridge has a bunch of, planks in it. And oftentimes, with us ADHDers, we're missing half the planks in the bridge, And so, but she makes it a, point to say you can fill it in, hence the name of the tool. You can fill in those planks that you're missing, right? And the tool and part of this tool that I actually want to talk about is the finding the right level of challenging. And I want to give an example, not something I'm currently using, but something I've actually have used that I remember, which is the example of tabs in middle school. So back when I was in middle school, just to preface, I'm bilingual. I speak English and Spanish fluently. I will say the English is a little bit stronger, just because of, the way I have developed. I've been living in America, for most of my life. But in middle school, I knew Spanish. It's not that I didn't know Spanish, but I went ahead and signed up for beginner Spanish because I knew it would be easy and I wouldn't really have to do shit, you know. And and you know, when I got there, I was there for like less than a week. It was so easy for me that I couldn't keep on. I'm like, this is shit that I learned when I was a baby. Okay, the shit that I was learning as a baby, this shit is literally like blowing me out of my mind. And I ended up switching to art class, where albeit I have always done art, I felt like it was, I guess, a little bit more challenging, you know, motivating me to pay attention and actually want to do the class. Tool number 2, we have reduce friction and grease the wheels, which is essentially kind of stating that, you know, when you have a lot of like too many physical obstacles in front of, you know, whatever it is that you have to do, you gotta reduce those barriers, take those barriers away, aka reduce friction and grease the wheels, which means putting things in place to make doing that thing easier. So for me, the part that I use is tapping into your why. And tapping into your why is just, you know, essentially remembering why you are doing the thing in the first place, right? Why are you doing the thing? What is the reasoning behind this? And so an example could be, you know, why am I sitting here doing this new diet that I don't, you know, want to do, and tapping into the reason behind it. And the reason being, you know what, because I have major health problems right now and I need to commit to this diet so that I can, you know, help my body be at its, you know, best optimal level. Because if I don't do this, my health will continue to decline. So it's just a simple exercise of remembering, right? Number 3 is add or increase accountability. Something that she wants to notate is that when it comes to this, when motivation isn't the issue and you start to try to add in accountability, it can make things worse for you and lead you into having increased anxiety, panic attacks, and dissociation. So this is why, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, it's important to figure out if the problem is motivation or if the problem is something else. Because sometimes you might think it's motivation and it's not, a lack of motivation and it's not. So something that I don't currently do, but that maybe I would like to try in the future, is finding productivity partners. What she talks about is something that, you know, she tried before, which is body doubling, right? So a person essentially, like, let's say you have like homework to do and the person comes and just quietly sits in the same room as you, and that kind of can spark that motivation to get the homework done just by having someone else's presence there, and essentially being like a partner to help you increase your productivity and, you know, your motivation to do it, right? And going off on a little side tangent, the author did want to talk about procrastination for a minute, and just about how some things about procrastination, starting with the fact that it's very common with ADHDers. I can attest to that. Guilty. Okay. Now there's 2 types of procrastination. There's active and passive procrastination. Now, active procrastination is, for example, like putting off homework until the night before it's due, right? You're consciously doing that, right? And then there's passive, which is the head in the sand kind of procrastination. So I'm just not going to think about it at all and completely just deny its existence type of procrastination. And don't be fooled, each one has its costs. Even if the active form can bring in the same results as not having procrastination issues, aka you still get the essay done whether you procrastinate or not, it's going to take a toll on you eventually. So going back to the tools, we got tool number 4, which is make rewards more salient. That's just essentially, you know, make the reward motivating for yourself. You know, the reward should be something that you want. And of course, with the example that I talked about earlier, the tool that I use is making the reward more immediate, you know, aka me eating the fried tortilla while I was doing the outline. Now, tool number 5 is don't expect yourself to stick with things. Something the author wanted to notate with this section is that oftentimes, you know, us ADHDers, we start things with the hope that this thing is the one and we'll finally stick with something forever, right? But the truth is we don't function like that. And we have to be open to working with our ever-changing interests and motivations, right? And I will say that this is a tool that when I read this part of the chapter, it really stuck with me. It really stuck with me, you know? And I want to go ahead and talk about actually 2 of the parts of this tool that I actively, you know, engage in. The first one being cycling through hobbies, jobs, and interests, right? You know, it's basically just like, hey, you know, if I get tired of this hobby, it's okay to switch on to another one. If you know, painting isn't exciting anymore, it's okay for me to start biking, you know? And I'll say I'm a person where I do that. I definitely allow myself to cycle through things. Same thing with jobs. I've worked 1,000,001 jobs. And I've honestly, it's been a lot of reasons as to why I end up leaving these jobs or whatever happens, right? But I think me allowing myself to cycle through interests and stuff has definitely been a lot easier going for me than trying to, you know, stick with something that's just not exciting me at all, you know? And the other one that they talked about, the other part of the tool that I use is being a bumblebee. And what is being a bumblebee? You know, being a bumblebee is, as she puts it, taking what you've learned from one skill and transferring those or taking what you've learned from one thing and transferring those skills to another thing, right? And I just want to read this section of the book because it really stuck with me, which is, those with ADHD are often referred to as a jack of all trades, master of none. But have you heard the expanded version of that quote? It says, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than master of one. There's value in building a diverse skill set. And that's that part that stuck with me. Even when earlier this week, when I could not remember anything else, that one part is what stuck with me more than anything, because I've always been a jack of all trades. And I think the funny part is that I've never heard the expanded version of that quote. Actually, I only heard, at first I grew up only knowing the first part of that quote, which is jack of all trades, right? And so that's one that for many years in my life, I would consider myself a jack of all trades. And then at some point in my 20s, I learned the second part of the quote, which is a jack of all trades, but master of none. And I'll say during this period of time, that's how I was feeling. Like, my God, why can't I master something? Just one fucking thing. I could do all these things, but I can't do just one thing well, you know? And now, you know, I finally know the third part of the quote, which is, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than master of one. And it's interesting because I remember me and my partner kind of had a conversation about that at one point, you know, earlier this year, where I was like, man, like, you know, sometimes I wish I could be like, you know, like you, in the sense of like having this one thing that I'm really fucking good at and that I've always been good at since forever, you know. And I'll give the example, you know, my partner, she's been a writer ever since she's a kid. That's the one thing she fucking has always loved and has sticked with, and you know, until now where she's a grown-ass adult. And I'm like, man, I wish I had something like that, you know, being able to actually have that much passion for something that consistently, my whole life, consistently for one whole life, and be really great at it. I remember she told me, like, you know, I know she said something along the lines of like, you know, but I wish I you know, could do as many things as you've done. You've done a lot of shit. You've done a lot of shit. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I have done a lot of shit, and I know how to do a lot of shit. You know, I know how, I've crocheted, I've sewed, I know how to bake, you know, I played basketball, I played volleyball, I've done ballet, I've done a lot of things. I've gained a lot of skills in my lifetime, and I'm like, you know what, that's actually, it's good to actually know all these skills, you know, because I find that they often end at times, like as I progress through life, things end up intertwining. Whatever skill I learned 5 years ago, you know, ends up somehow helping me now 5 years later. And so that's something that I really had to, you know, that made me think for a minute, you know. The author closes off this chapter talking about how we have two internal coaches inside of us at times, right? You know, Coach A is the one who berates us, criticizes us, is mean to us, right? And then we have Coach B, which is very supportive towards us, understanding, very patient with us. When Coach A creeps in, ask yourself what Coach B would say. You know, I think we all have Coach A inside of us, and oftentimes Coach A, you know, we weren't born with Coach A, but Coach A was kind of inserted into us by the people around us. You know, we all wanted to have Coach B, but not all of us got to grow up with Coach B. A lot of us got to grow up with Coach A. And once you become an adult, although Coach A is no longer physically around you, Coach A has become a part of your mind, right? And albeit it's an unhealthy tool that can sometimes help us get things done, it has its, you know, consequences. It hurts us, you know. Do we really want to talk to ourselves? Do we really want this Coach A to talk to us when we know that we wouldn't be that kind of coach to others, right? We wouldn't want to talk to others like that. So why should we talk to ourselves like that? We would all want to be Coach B to others, you know. I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I know I would always want to be Coach B for someone else. So why can't I be Coach B for myself, right? And that concludes, you know, today's chapter. That was understanding motivation in our ADHD brains. So thank you, you know, for taking the time to learn with me, wormlings. I will see you on the next one, okay?